Hello, my name is Drew, and I'm the Aspiring Master, and welcome once again to the Aspiring Master Presents. This is a show where we talk about the meanings, misunderstandings, and insights about the important words that we use and misuse on a daily basis. Really understanding what we're truly meaning while we talk allows us to convey that meaning and be more understood when we're communicating with others. This not only allows us clearer communication, so we can get what we need quicker and with less stress, but also allows us to understand ourselves in more depth than we thought possible. Today on our show, we have our special guest, my wife, Talia Wilson, who, as with myself, is an enthusiastic advocate for personal growth and personal awareness. Today, we'll be talking about the word nostalgia. So, let's go. Okay, let's see. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Drew, and I'm the Aspiring Master. And today we are going to be talking about, what could it be? I don't know. I wax for some nostalgia. Now, for those people that are unfamiliar with nostalgia, we're going to go over to the Merriam-Webster dictionary here. And go a wistful or excessively sentimental yearning for a return to or of some past period or irrecoverable condition. So yeah, there's that. It's homesickness is like homesick is nostalgia, and I do believe. Let us quickly look up nostalgia origins.
I know those.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Nostos, which is homecoming or home, it depends on the translation, and algia, which is pain.
Right. Homecoming pain.
Homecoming pain.
That's sort of like me at the end of the day. Oh, look, it's homecoming pain. Well, yeah. So what initially happened in the 17th century is they found that soldiers going out on the front would pine for their home. So they got homesick. What we call homesick right now, and they coined this phrase because there were some of them that were getting so depressed they were killing themselves. Some of them that were so depressed that they got sick and died. There was a whole bunch of stuff that going on. So they coined the term nostalgia for it. And actually, I do believe that there was an old Swedish, and I love how I say this because it's like, it was a song that they used to sing that reminded them of home that was actually punishable by death at the time to sing because it got people homesick, right? Got people nostalgic.
I take it wasn't Kumbaya.
No, it wasn't. It was, I think it was like a milking song or something. Anyway, that's, yeah, I read it somewhere. And it was a song that they used to sing. Anyway.
Okay.
In the 17th century. So they outlawed it, and it was punishable by death to sing it.
Wow.
Because it reminded everybody of home. So if we wonder why we're talking about the word nostalgia today, is that I find that so many people right now are nostalgic for past. And I think that when we're talking about nostalgia, I think that there's like it said, wistful. Let's see, back again. Whimsical, no, a wistful or excessively sentimental, right? Wistful. Well, I mean, I don't know. I've always thought of nostalgia as a wistful emotion. Like, I loved 80s music. I loved growing up in the 80s. I loved all of the things that happened in the 80s. I loved the 80s because it was when I became a real person. It was when I formulated the person that I am today.
He was fake during the 70s.
I was, so during the 70s, I was, well, I mean, it was just that growing period when you're hitting your teens and you're really becoming who you are. And the 80s really shaped that. So when I talk about loving the 80s. I love the 80s music. I remember the feelings when I hear a piece of music of what I was feeling at the time. When we talk about nostalgia, um, like I said, my version of it was just like, oh, I'm nostalgic. You know, you're feeling that wonderful little sensation of, oh, that was so cool back
Right.
then. But it's not like you need it to be back then. It's not like you're wishing it was then now,
Right.
or that this the my present is so horrible that I want to go back there because that was way better than what we're doing today.
Yeah.
Um,
The one of the terms I saw when I was researching that were thrown around was bittersweet.
Bittersweet,
You know,
yes, and
bittersweet.
and I think that that's right. Bittersweet. It's like
Hmm.
it's that paradox because
Right.
bittersweet is kind of a paradoxical statement. It's it's I remember it with fondness and
Hmm.
with bitterness, right? Like I mean,
Or
I
or
remember the
even just
sugar and the spice.
or even just being sad that yeah, I can remember, and that's kind of cool, and I get the warm fuzzy feeling, but then the bittersweet part of knowing you can never go back, you can
Yeah,
never re-experience that, those days are long gone,
yeah.
that type
Well,
of
and I
thing.
mean, it's yes, certainly. It's you. There's a certain amount of mourning that goes with it.
Oh
I
yeah,
think
definitely.
with nostalgia,
And I
you
think
have
that's
to.
how it doppeled into, the soldiers at war killing themselves, or people who are
Well, yeah,
forced to migrate. Fiddler on the Roof comes to mind. What happened to all the people when they left Anikavetka, or whatever the town
and
was? You
and
know,
and truthfully, what you're saying is yeah. At that point, the reason they got that nostalgia was so crippling was because they were in a war situation where they were killing people, blood and guts everywhere.
right?
It was literally horrible,
Well, and
and
not knowing if they were going to get to
yeah,
go
if
home,
they were going to get to go
and
home,
seeing their
but
friends die and
but
everything.
they couldn't uh, live in the moment when they kept wishing that they were back in another
No,
moment, right?
no.
Um, and so I totally understand why that happened. I even totally understand why nostalgic people these days want to go back to a different time. Um,
Yes, and this isn't it's not a new concept either. I mean, hello, American Graffiti, Happy Days, even you could even make the argument for All in the Family,
right?
for Archie Bunker's
Yeah.
attitudes at least.
Yeah.
Um,
Those were the
yeah.
days.
So I mean, the concept of nostalgia and yearning for the past is not a new thing at all.
No, of course not. I
Absolutely
mean,
not. And now we're being fed in our media. I mean, the Gen Xers, our generation, are the ones producing the TV shows and the movies and stuff for the most part. And why do you think Stranger Things became popular? You
right.
know,
Well, of course. Like, I mean, we wax for a time when we were, and I think it was literally we were just formulating ourselves as people.
right,
Gen
right,
Xers during the 80s were really formulating our own personalities. We were breaking away from our families.
right,
We were creating lives for ourselves and formulating the people that we are today. So
right.
I totally understand nostalgia and the bitter sweetness of it. I mean, I listen to my favorite 80s songs and I'm just like, oh, and I remember it, and I feel that it's not a pain, but it's the longing in my chest,
Hmm.
and oh yeah, that would be so much fun. I don't get caught up in the fact myself um, that you know it was better back then, right? And I think that here's the mistake. I think this is where we take nostalgia to the next level, is when we say it was better back then. The things that are happening now are horrible and it was so much better back then.
Yeah, the
And
people who have researched nostalgia, actually, because there are people who research it.
mm,
That's the thing. Is it's one thing to remember, or to pine, or to even long for stuff that happened in the past, but it's when you don't, it seems easier because it was, you were younger, you didn't think as deeply, or whatever the situation was, so you remember it as being that simple, or that, you know
right.
you still look at it through that lens, basically.
Hmm.
And you're not delving down below that to see, okay, why was it so easy? You know,
Right.
like with the 50s, because the corporate tax rate was higher, the wages were, I mean, the cost of living was way lower, you know. But at the other part of that is women rarely could work, you know. They were stuck at home raising the kids and couldn't even get a bank account or a credit card without their husband. I mean, so I mean, there's, and the fact that the whole thing was propaganda, anyways, you know.
Well,
So,
I think that like right now what we're seeing, and I know I'm going to sort of delve into political arenas a little bit here,
well, I
and
think it's unavoidable, to be
well, yeah, it's like,
honest.
and especially for nostalgism. Um,
Well, and that's the other thing. Once you put an ism on it, you've
yeah,
turned it. It's not just a what's the word I want? It's not just a thing. It's now an ideology.
yeah,
And when something becomes an ideology, it can. That's where it becomes toxic.
yeah. Well, and let me explain where I came up with the nostalgism. Um, is I was listening to a talk that Brene Brown was doing on her new book. And what is her new book?
The Atlas of the Heart.
Atlas of the Heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to a talk she was doing, and she was describing. She was talking to a doctor, and they were talking about nostalgia. And you and I were watching it together,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. We
I
watched
said,
the. They did a series. Yeah,
there's a problem with the way that they're doing this. They're taking one word and they're saying it means this and this and this, and I'm going. We have to separate. We have to differentiate what's really going on right now,
right.
in especially in our political climate and in our ideological climate, and especially with the baby boomers. Being as old as they are and as set in their ways, and then they remember the past, and they're the media is really encouraging
Oh,
people to
huge,
to go
huge.
the like the 50s were the idyllic era, and it's really pushing this home and creating what I would call nostalgiaism, um, because it becomes uh, like a, a way of life almost.
Right.
Um, it's not nostalgia anymore.
No.
Nostalgia is something like you said. It's a bittersweet thing. It's
Yeah.
a I remember when, and
Right.
I remember when I was young. And I mean, do I long to be younger? Well, of course. When I get up and my back is hurting,
Oh
and
my god. I know,
like
right?
my
Middle
knees are
age.
hurting, and my whole body's doing its
Mm-hmm.
thing, and I'm slowly trundling towards death. Um,
Right.
and quite more a lot more quickly now, but um, right, but it's when you as you
Children
get
like putting too much butter in his food.
exactly uh, and so we as we get older, of course we're going to go look back on our youth, which totally passed us by back then, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
we didn't
yeah,
even
because
realize.
all we're waiting to do is to, we just want to have fun. And then,
Yeah.
oh, now that we're, teenagers, were expected to be more grown up and be adult. And so now we can't wait to be adults because then we'll have freedom. And then, yeah, that never
Well, I mean,
happens.
if I look back on my life and I go, yeah, there was some really cool bits in there, but dude, most of it, and I'm talking most of it, was a slog. It was trying to figure things out. It was being confused a lot. It was,
Mine
like, I
was
mean,
ignorant. I was
yeah,
so
ignorant.
ignorant.
Well, and getting into trouble and finding the boundaries,
Yeah.
going out into society and trying to figure out what's
Talking
going
too
on.
much,
Yeah,
kissing the boys.
I didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
I talked a lot, but no kissing boys. It wasn't on my agenda. But um, it's there was a lot of rough stuff that went on. Like, I mean, and the '80s was not fantastic. I remember
No.
growing up in Edmonton, Alberta, in the '80s, and we had a curfew. Now, most people didn't remember that there was a curfew. I remembered it. It was it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Come on to the TV. we were not allowed as children to be out past 10 o'clock. Now, I don't even remember the reason that we had a curfew, and most people don't even remember that there was a curfew, but it was imposed for a number of months, and I'm pretty sure it was during the summer. And who knows? It could have been that there was a killer on the loose. I have no idea. But we had a curfew, and it sucked that we couldn't be outside. It's there was a lot of stuff that went on that was not cool. Like, I mean, while I was growing up in the 80s, there was a lot of stuff that wasn't cool. You
Yeah,
know,
I don't think I ever lived any place that had a curfew, but I know after we moved, and I'd go visit my cousins, and their dad for a while was living in a very, very small town.
hmm
They had a curfew, and of course the only only place open late there is the tavern, and it had one of those divider thingies where anyone could go in. So you could go, the kids could go there till 9 o'clock. So we used to go there and get French fries and stuff. But yeah, I think you're right. The curfew is 10 and stuff, and we had to be back to my uncle's house, you know,
right.
by that. But
But this
you
was
know,
an illegal curfew that you were supposed to follow,
what
right? Like, I mean, that's that's
did it come
insane.
from, like a kidnapping or something? 'Cause
We
I know
don't
there
know.
was
I
some.
don't remember what it is, and it's one of those things that I'd
Wow.
like to kind of go through the
Because
archives at the Edmonton Journal and see.
that the entirety of Edmonton, or was it just
Yeah,
one part?
no, I was pretty
Wow,
sure it was all of Edmonton, like all of Edmonton. We
that's
were, we were
wild.
had a
A
one.
city that big, that's
Yeah, it was
wow.
huge, and
That's wild.
and of
I
course it
can
wasn't as
imagine
big during the
Seattle or
'80s, but
LA having a curfew like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
But like I mean, and as a wonderful human being, I longed for uh, to be able to go back there. I would love to, but with my current knowledge, I would love to be able to go back there and take a look at the person because I don't remember three-quarters of the stuff that happened. I remember the highlights and the lowlights, right?
Yeah, it's
Uh,
interesting because like trying to remember stuff, and you know your brain will play tricks on you and remember stuff happening in different ways, and that's another problem with nostalgia too. Is
right,
you don't remember. Nostalgia is very subjective because you can't remember objectively. You know, you
right.
think you do, but you don't, unless there's some kind of proof, like a journal or diary, or like when I was 9, we got our first video camera. So
hmm
Dad would tape Christmas Eve and all my school plays and my band, my band concerts. Oh my God. You know, so I've got, and then I got my own camera when I was 17. So I mean, there's some of that stuff roaming around, you know,
Right,
but you know, it's not like I was out there filming everything, you know.
right.
So,
Well,
and
I
then
mean, but but of course the media is not telling us that it was great, right? Um, but anyway, it's when we're talking about nostalgia, it's like, yeah, I haven't seen a ton of people, and of course, Stranger Things, and we see the media, but I don't see the media as saying '80s was the greatest time ever. I see the media talking about '80s music as being some of the greatest music ever.
right.
But I don't see the media going, oh, the '80s were great. What I see mostly on a propaganda level is, oh, for the '50s. The '50s were the perfect era. We
Yeah,
had
but
lots of
we're
money. We had,
starting to see, yeah, and that was the problem with like Stranger Things and all that stuff about the '80s and being so great, and we had all these, you know, we had
but
Nintendos, we had
monsters ate
video
us in the
games,
'80s. Come on.
we had
You saw it happen.
yeah, we had
Yeah,
video games and Nintendo and really cool Happy Meal toys and all that crap.
we
But
did.
we also saw a massive decline in wages
Right.
and distribution of wealth, and that's where the divide. It was actually after Nixon removed the gold standard
hmm
from the financial system, and that's when the divide between the
Well,
bottom 90% and the top 10 happened.
well, here's the thing. Is
So
like
the
when
80s were not as prosperous as what people say.
Well, I agree. And I don't think that any time that we are remembering is as great as we thought it was, in any sense of the word. Like, I mean, it depends on where you were in the world. Uh,
That's
you know,
true. That's true.
it's like, but when we're talking about the political climate here in Canada or in the United States, um, I know that the United States has been vilifying the '50s forever.
Not
That well,
vilifying,
well,
building it up.
building it up.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Nostalgically, they go, "Oh, we had families and they shared together and they did all this stuff." And you know what? There is some grain of
Yeah.
truth to that. We have lost as a society our family cohesion, our neighborhood cohesion, our
Right.
community cohesion
Right.
based on the fact that we've been pumped full of you have to go it alone and you're only going to get ahead if you do this. And the fact that at this point, absolutely, we need both people to work in a household, or one of them has to make an incredible amount of money
Right.
to be able to survive in this society in our economies right now. So
Right.
there is, like, I mean, when we take a look at the fact that our families themselves aren't as cohesive as they used to be, I can say yes, because our economic stability at that time was coming out of the Second World War. There was a period of prosperity, of people coming home, of the big baby boom happening
Hmm.
because you can't really
Yeah.
build
We
families
know
in
how
Europe.
we know how
Yeah,
the baby
yeah,
boom happened.
yeah. Okay,
Hello.
so but there was this huge amount of prosperity because the U.S., Canada, they got some stuff from the war, like
Well,
they
yeah.
defeated these
I mean, the
people,
war
and
essentially ended the Great Depression
yeah,
because
exactly,
all the men went to war. Well, most of them,
yeah.
and the women went to work in the factories, and there was a lot of
Well,
industrialization that happened and all that crap.
yeah, and it's like
So,
all of a sudden this huge influx of money because war was the thing,
yeah.
and everybody contributed. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it was more prosperous back
Right.
then, and that's when the U.S. started creating its own war
Right.
economy. Really,
I want to interject and go
yeah.
back to what you said about like um, the families and
Hmm.
stuff. Um, both my parents grew up in the 50s, so yeah, they. My mom more than my dad, I think, had the more nuclear family type upbringing. But like they go out and play with their friends. They knew all the kids in the neighborhood. They all walked
Hmm.
to school together. They all played together. Their parents knew each other, type thing. And I don't really remember having that in the 80s. I knew who
Hmm.
the neighbors were on either side of us, and I think one of my dad's friends lived in. We didn't have a cul-de-sac; it was a loop, and one of my dad's friends, I think, lived on the opposite side for a while. And the first kid I ever babysat lived on the opposite side. So, we knew a few people, but not a lot.
Yeah.
So I remember going out and ride my bike around, and there were a couple kids. I couldn't even tell you what the names are now.
Hmm.
But I mean, you remember in the 80s we had Stranger Danger, and
Yeah.
um, I remember them sending home leaflets about older kids giving younger kids acid tabs or laced candies and shit like that. Sorry, stuff like that, and so it wasn't. I don't think it was as safe to, you know.
Well, I don't think that it was as safe or not as safe. I think that a lot of the stuff that was happening in the 50s was under the table.
Of course it
Nobody was
was.
looking, right?
Yeah,
Like, I mean, seriously, I
or it
mean,
was
there was
just,
a
oh,
lot of,
that's not our business,
yeah,
or
there was a lot of stuff that happened in the
oh,
50s that
absolutely,
nobody talked about
yeah.
because, well, that wasn't a thing.
Right, and I
So,
think with the media getting more, I want to say global because we didn't quite have the 24-hour news cycle yet. That came later.
mhm,
Um, but like the kidnapping of Adam Walsh, and that was big. Like mom was scared to leave me alone in a store,
mhm.
or if I ran off on my own, type thing. So I mean, I think there was a lot of fear about, and again, stranger danger. I mean, it was the big thing. You had to stay away from the big white van,
Mhm.
type thing.
Well,
You
I
know,
mean, part of what's happened, I mean, because we have to, in order to understand nostalgia and nostalgism, we have to look at what's happened as we've progressed, okay?
right?
Yet the nuclear family has fallen apart. It really has. And why is that? Well, one, both parents have to work, so there's no time to spend with the kids.
Yeah,
and when they get home from work, both of them are tired. So, and then the kids want to have attention and
Mm-hmm.
all of that stuff. Well, we invented videotapes, and you know, uh,
Yep.
there was Disney, and
Sunday morning cartoons. Yeah, I
Sunday
remember
morning
when the
cartoons.
yeah, and I remember when
So,
the Disney Channel came out, and it was a premium channel. You
and
know.
we were again with the growth of the media,
Hmm.
we were exposed to more and more things going on. And remember that the
Yeah,
media
my
is
my
it,
parents had Cinemax, so
yeah,
yes,
the media is not focused on great things. They're focused on the bad
bad
stuff
things.
because
Yeah,
that's the thing
absolutely.
that everybody wants to
Yeah.
see.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Oh, whoa, I wonder who got hurt today.
What do you think
It's like,
true crime documentaries are so popular?
well, I mean,
You know.
any kind of crime is popular
Yeah.
because or hurt people hurting people, or I mean, the people didn't go to the big car races to see the cars go by. They
No.
went they a lot of them went to see the crashes.
Yeah. I mean,
Whoa, what happened?
why do you think destruction derbies are so damn popular?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the difference between, say, the 50s and the nuclear family,
Right.
and as much as I say, yeah, I think that the nuclear family would be a good thing, but there is no way to do it in our current society
No.
in the way that we have,
No.
that capitalism has moved.
I
Um,
mean, now we're to the point with inflation and the fallout from the pandemic that I mean, the nuclear family can't even afford to remain a nuclear family. I mean, you're seeing families buy houses together, and
mhm,
the places that have 6 roommates.
mhm.
Because it's like there is no American dream anymore. I'm sorry, there really isn't.
Yeah, well, the economy is such that we don't really have the opportunity to be able to say, oh, mom's going to stay home or dad's going to stay home. In this day and age, dads can stay home too. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah, we
nothing
have
wrong with either
maternity
of it.
leave and stuff.
Right,
Yeah,
right. We've
and
got maternity
stay-at-home
leave for men.
dads. Yeah.
I think that what's happened though is when we zap back to nostalgia and nostalgism,
Hmm.
um, that we say, like they say, that the nuclear family has been lost. I agree. I agree it has. Um, and we should figure out how to figure out our current economy and understanding of ourselves to be able to bring some of that back. Absolutely.
Right.
But what they're saying is the 50s were great. The 50s had the nuclear family. So we want to recreate the 50s. And so what they're doing is they're creating this idea that because the 50s had nuclear families and because nuclear families are something, and community is something that we would want to strive for, that, well, we had it in the 50s, so let's recreate it. Well, you can't recreate something from the past, and that's where that nostalgiaism comes in. But
Yeah, in
here's
this day and age, I don't think you want to suggest an ideology where old white men are the ones in charge.
But yeah, but again, remember that it is, and especially for the older crowd, it is a draw. It's like, oh, back when we could speak our mind and we didn't get shut up by these people that were politically correct, and we could, smack our women and whatever. It's like, literally a lot of that pent up anger and rage that is going on, which is we can't say certain words, they're not. And the old vanguard, and especially the boomers,
Mm-hmm.
uh, are long to be able to say stuff again. Like now, and don't get me wrong here, because I think that the PC culture goes overboard, as we almost
Yes,
always
it
do.
does.
We have this teeter totter. Well, let's do the example that we did earlier. We have this teeter totter, right? So whereas in the 50s, male dominated, women stayed at home, smiled and cooked supper, and I mean, there's all of these really males that are in power, I'm sure, that would love to have all of that back, because you know there's all of a sudden, here we are today, which is, oh, we can't say certain words, and you can't have, we have to tear down some statues, and like everything's changing quite radically. from that extreme.
Yeah.
And we go from one extreme to another extreme,
Mm-hmm.
and with missing the balance point, because it just goes like this and goes flump, right? We miss the balance point because there has to be an understanding of this side and this side, because there are pluses to both sides.
Right.
But nostalgiaism is makes that becomes a rebellion against today, right?
That's a good point.
It really becomes a
Mm-hmm.
rebellion
Mm-hmm.
of screw you people, we're gonna do what we want, right?
And that's the point that a lot of the nostalgia researchers make is they're so hyper focused on what they don't have anymore.
Yeah.
And for reasons that may not even necessarily be true based on how they're remembering stuff, that they are not open to progress and change and new people and people they never would have associated with. And so when they get into a place and there's someone who is, say they're at the hospital and their nurse is, pick one,
Yeah.
and then they're like, and it's like, dude, you have to accept it,
Right.
You may not like it, and there's no one saying you have to like change, that you have to like, this stuff that you didn't grow up with, this stuff you're not used to, or this stuff. There's no one saying you have to like it. You have to, I would say, I guess, acknowledge it exists.
Right.
And, let it exist in its own space. I mean,
Well,
while you're
and
existing in yours,
And two, here's something that the difference between nostalgia and nostalgism is nostalgia can get you to say, how can we help bring some of that goodness back
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right now? And nostalgiaism is, how can we get back what we
to
lost?
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And I think nostalgia says allows people their space. It says, we've lost some of this. What can we do to work at bringing some of this stuff back? Because there was some good stuff back there,
Right.
that would benefit us right now.
Right.
Whereas nostalgiaism says, you're all wrong. It's a black and white thing. I'm right. It was better back then, and this is all wrong, and we need to change and go back to basic Christian values or whatever values, right? We need to go back to our values of when we were prosperous and rich, and and like I said, the media sort of fans this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it gets people incensed. It gets them to rebel against what is now happening.
Yeah.
And it gets them to rebel against the change that's happening, right? Because people don't like change. They just don't.
They don't.
They just do not like change. I love change because it's new. I don't necessarily like the feeling that I get when I'm wrong, right? When I'm incorrect about something and I need to change something.
Like how you switch that up.
Well, I mean, wrong is a subjective thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's, if I'm incorrect about stuff, I like to be corrected, but I don't like the feeling of being incorrect, right? But because I'm used to being correct, right?
Wow, spoken like a true white guy.
Yeah, really. But it's, when we're talking about nostalgia, it is it's like a rebellion, or nostalgiaism is like a rebellion against now.
Oh, it is. Totally is.
We want to be back there, and we want to have that. So we are going to embrace the theoretical values that were alive back then, because, whether that's the way that people were living, we have to embrace all of that stuff. And to be really honest and bluntly honest about it, it's they're embracing a version of Christianity that was happening back then, right? That was fairly harsh and non-progressive. And I think that when we look at what was going on back there, that everything was fairly harsh and really non-progressive. Yeah, we were excited to get new products that
Mhm.
helped us in the kitchen.
Right.
Um, you know, we were really excited to get new products and have those new innovations, right? So long as everything stayed the same, right? Yeah, make it easier to make cakes,
Mhm.
but make everything stay the same. And I think that you and I were talking about the big change really happened in the 60s when women got birth
Birth
control.
control. Yes.
They got access to birth control, and so they weren't chained to
Yeah, and
uh,
it wasn't
the household.
universal access to it.
No.
You usually had to be in a committed relationship. You didn't necessarily have to be married. Some places you did, but
Well,
for
but
the
it,
most part, you just had to be in a committed relationship
all of a
for it
sudden,
to.
well, and I mean, and here's another point too, um, because actually the war really got women to start to understand that they could do something else.
Absolutely.
And the 50s, they had to go back to, and I think that there's a lot of women out there, because I'm sure that I've seen shows on that said, no, I wanted to keep going to work and never look back, right? I didn't want to be a part of this whole be at home
Well,
thing.
reminds me of a line from A League of Their Own. Are we
Mm,
supposed to send the men returning from war back to the kitchen?
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
and it's like, yeah,
So it's not like none of this was universally wonderful.
no,
It's presented like, I mean, all the media at the time was aimed at getting everybody to be complacent with their lot,
mm-hmm.
right? Leave it to Beaver, and
uh,
everything's awesome, right? With the lessons that those shows taught. But again, it's all about everything being cool and wonderful, and oh yes, we have some of our troubles, but we don't, like, I mean, there wasn't a lot of and especially television, which was, as the 50s went on, in every home. Um, there wasn't a lot pointing to reality. I mean, yeah, there was news.
there's
Uh,
news. I'm trying to remember when PBS came into play
but, I mean,
because I know when whenever Julia Child went on the air,
right.
that was huge. Not only was she cooking on TV, a woman, you know, on television, but also say public television. You know, there wouldn't be a PBS today without Julie Child. There really wouldn't. You know, but I mean there, and then there was you had the soap operas starting in the '60s. You had General Hospital and Dark Shadows
Hmm.
and Bold and the Beautiful. That stuff started. To entertain the women while they're waiting for their kids to come home. Except for Dark Shadows, all the kids were running home to watch it. You know,
Right.
but yeah, and I think the big thing was with the '60s. Birth control came in, civil rights came in.
Well, and
Um,
but like I said, I think that we started it in the 40s, in the 30s and 40s, when women went to work because there was no men to work. They were
or
all
they
uh,
were in the depression, so they had to work.
right.
Like I
And
remember
then
my grandma talking about her parents um, taking turns going off to work because there was no job, so they'd have to travel somewhere to work. One of
right.
them would stay home with the kids while the other one worked, and then the one would come home, and then the other
Yeah.
one would leave.
Well, and they
You
they
know,
didn't they like, I mean, yeah, 50s were prosperous because of the war and how what the
yeah,
war economy happened,
yeah,
and so we had some prosperity for the first time in a long
right.
time, right?
Well,
Like, I
and
mean,
as industrialization continued to evolve and
well,
everything
and I
too.
mean, no different than the Roaring Twenties.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
we had
yeah,
the Roaring
mm-hmm.
Twenties, and it was super prosperous right after that war,
Right,
right? Right after the First World War,
yeah,
it became super
yeah.
prosperous, and then all of a sudden we went into the huge depression, um, and then like right after that, we went into a depression, and then we had another war, a
Mm-hmm.
bigger one, and we had a period of prosperity that continued, through the 60s. But as it went on, the prosperity went down, right? It
Well,
was
and the
in,
Vietnam War had something to do with that
oh
too,
yeah, too.
because it wasn't just, yeah, things were still prosperous to a point,
Right.
but
But I mean,
the attitude shifted.
but remember, the attitude shifted also because of Media. They put what was going on over there on TV, and that really, really
Mm-hmm.
affected how people dealt with their government. I mean, whether we realize it or not, it was media in our homes that changed us completely from the model that we had back then to the model that we have today.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look back on a nostalgic level, and I think that, the propaganda that's happening, and it's not everywhere, but there's a lot of it out there that says, remember the good old days when we could, when we were on top of the world and we could say whatever we wanted, and we had power, and we could come home and our wife had cooked us supper, and like all of that kind of nostalgiaism,
So
um,
overrated. So
right?
overrated.
Well, but again, then it becomes that black and white thing of, you've taken this from us, and it becomes a partisan thing, because now it's the other guys that took it from us, because they were the ones that had more taxes, and they were the ones, right? Like, and again, it's cherry picking what
Yeah.
you choose to remember, right? It's cherry picking about that. And of course, the media from one side or another just wants to point at the bad stuff from the other side. They're not looking at the whole picture, they're just looking at their little section, as long as they can convince the people to say it was better back then,
Right.
um, and become black and white. It just makes it nostalgiaism and not nostalgia anymore. It's not
Right.
something that we can remember with fondness, but something we remember with regret, really,
Yeah. Well,
right?
it's like the people today are complaining about Star Trek being woke.
Right,
And it's like Star Trek has always been woke.
right.
It was the first TV show to have a black woman on there not being a domestic,
Hmm.
and the first interracial kiss. And you go back and look at some of the storylines they were doing back then for the 60s, and thank God for Lucille Ball, because there wouldn't have been a Star Trek without her, you know.
Hmm.
And it's, mind boggling that they were able to do some of that stuff back then,
Hmm.
you know. And not, I mean, because censorship back then was huge on
Right. Well, I
television.
mean,
Huge.
and so when we're looking at
I mean, it
nos
still is, but it's evolved.
right, when we're looking at nostalgia, it's like, yeah, we could go back. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
remember when the first woman comedian became a producer, and she was it. She
Yeah,
was the lady,
she was a
uh,
lady.
in Hollywood, and without her, we couldn't have had the ladies that came after her, like Mary Tyler Moore
And
and
Carol Burnett
Carol
and
Burnett, and like these people were inspired by this lady that really took the world by storm. On So, like, I mean, and again, I can't blame everything on media,
no,
because it did good stuff
it
just
did.
as much as it
It,
did warped our senses. But I think that in the 50s, it really was really warping, and these people, stay this course, and be the good housewife, and oh, this is how you do it, and so we had a bunch of that stuff happening, because I think that the war had scared the crap out of all the guys that came home, because all of a sudden a lot of these women didn't want to be that anymore, right? Because up until then, that was their role.
right.
And I think that, yeah, that's what really started it, is the war. But I think that, with the propaganda, with all of the stuff that was going on in the 50s, the nuclear family,
Mm-hmm.
I think that it was an illusion that was propagated by the media at the time.
Well,
I
and the
don't think
fear
that.
of nuclear war. Remember, they were in the Cold
Right,
War during
yeah.
that time too. So I mean, um, I remember hearing my parents talk about the duck and cover drills, whatever they were called.
Yeah,
You know,
under the desks, what
yeah.
like a desk would stop a roof from falling on you.
Or the
But
whole, you see the pictures of the kids in the hallways with their hands over the back of their heads. You know,
yeah,
I remember doing duck and cover in the 80s and 90s, but it was for earthquakes.
yeah.
You know,
But so it's like there was a lot of unreality to the old propaganda, and there was a lot
well,
of
yeah,
like,
that's the whole point of propaganda.
yeah, the nuclear family really started to become not the nuclear family in the 50s. I think that what they're pining for really is before the depression. I think they're pining for the 20s when we're talking about all of that
Right.
and that kind of nostalgia. Like, I mean, we don't take into account, I mean, and the black and white people that say that everything's either this way or that way, so it's bad now and
And when you're
it's better
saying
back
black and
then.
white in that context, you're not talking about race. You're talking
No, no,
about
no, I'm talking about
historical
viewpoints.
viewpoints.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. When I'm talking about viewpoints, uh, it's like
I
it's
just want to
either
clarify that.
black or white. There's no
Yeah.
colors in
There's
between,
no gray
right? Like
area.
there's no
Yeah.
gray
Yeah.
areas
There's
at
no
all. It
smudging of
was
the line.
it
It's
is
a hard line in
horrible
the
now,
sand.
and it was
Yeah.
better back then. And that's nostalgism. That's nostalgiaism, as opposed to nostalgia when we go, yeah, there was some really good stuff and there was some really bad stuff. Um, as with
Yeah.
any era,
Lower
and
cost of living. That would be
yeah,
nice.
well, I mean, lower cost of living, but you also have to remember that we didn't have the populations that we
No,
have
we
now,
didn't. We really didn't. No.
right? Like, I mean, seriously,
Mm-hmm.
we've doubled to tripled to quadrupled the
And I don't
population
think
from
our
back then.
military was as prosperous or as huge. I mean, the
Yeah,
military industrial complex right now is like in the states is like massive. I don't even know the. You might want to look up the stat on how much of the U.S. federal budget actually goes to the military, because I know it's quite a bit, especially when there's a Republican in office.
so 1950, there was 157 million people in the U.S.
That's
Okay,
nothing.
2010, there was 312 million. That's double. I mean, so when we're talking about economic disparity, we have
Speaking
more.
of birth control,
Okay,
use it.
yeah, but I mean, when we're talking about the disparity of it was better that back then because we were more prosperous. Remember, we had just come out of a depression,
Yeah.
so it wasn't as prosperous before that, and we went into a war which eradicated the depression because more money was generated because more things were needed and the
Right.
government paid, and there was a whole bunch of stuff that went on.
Right.
But and the stocks went up because of
Yeah.
everything was
Yeah,
worth
yeah,
more, and so we have that. But remember, 157 million. We just lost a bunch of millions of people in the war, right? Millions of people died in that war.
Yeah.
So the world population just went down.
Mhm.
Um,
Especially
so
in Europe.
at the difference between 157 million people needing work and 312 million people, and we're up to 350, I think, right now in the States. 350 million people.
Well, and I think during this time, in the last few years, Canada's population has dropped. If I remember right.
Yeah, 341,913,902 as of last year.
Because I think we're actually seeing usually the numbers are switched on people from like immigrating from the U.S. to Canada.
Yeah.
It's gone the other way now.
Yeah.
And that's healthcare across the board. But I mean, like, and we saw this in the '80s, the start of the more people, the population explosion. Because I didn't have a class in grade school that wasn't overcrowded. Our school
Right.
was overcrowded, and we were one of the better elementary schools. And sixth grade, my class started in the music room, and 2 classes started in the cafeteria because we didn't have enough classrooms, and they had to bring in a whole bunch of portables.
Right.
And it's like we had massive, and then even in college, the year I went to University of Oregon was when they had record number of attendance.
Yeah.
They topped 20,000 for the first time.
So,
That is nothing for a college.
well,
You
so
know,
we've gone 200 million, and we can't even conceive of what that number
no,
means.
no.
We've 200 million more people that need jobs and infrastructure and all of
Well,
that stuff.
and not just that. You consider the kids too. That's that many people on the whole needing health care
Right,
and food and access to resources. Never mind work, because most people don't start to work till they're teenagers.
right.
So the workforce, it isn't quite that much, but the
So
amount of people using it's
the
everyone using the
the
resources.
prosperity that
Yeah.
they're toting from the 50s, and just it doesn't work. And nostalgiaism is saying we got to go back there. We got to go back to those values, those basic values, because we don't have those values anymore. And that's not true. We have lots of those values. We just can't implement them. They can't be implemented the same way because we don't have the prosperity. We don't have, hold on, we don't have, we've got too much population. We've
Mm-hmm.
got so many different things, like higher technology is a huge one.
Right.
Progression in just how we move forward in technology.
I was going to bring up infrastructure.
Right.
The interstate highway system was created by Eisenhower. That came out in the 50s.
Yeah.
He saw ahead just how the need for that was going to be. I think because they were starting to see, everyone having all the babies, the baby boom. And okay, we're going to end up with a lot more people here. Plus, it's going to make travel more cohesive because you can do it faster, quicker. It was easier to go longer distances. And look at freeways now
Right.
down there. Like, have you ever driven in
Well,
LA? Oh my god.
and here's another point on nostalgiaism is and frankly don't understand why they haven't gotten here yet. It's like, well, I mean, we've got 341 or 342 million people. We should probably cut that down so that we can get back to the 50s level, right? Now,
Okay.
yeah, I know
I,
that's
I'm gonna insert a conspiracy theory here about
yeah.
that and talk about our food supply and genetically modified organisms
Hmm.
and the increase, like high fructose corn syrup, trans fats, and
Well, I mean, it's
the
it's always
sugar. What the sugar industry did. You
it's
can't tell me that it wasn't someone somewhere who goes, oh, if we convince people that fat is bad and we pump them full of sugar,
yeah,
they'll get diabetes and they won't live as long. And I say that with, oh my God, because my best friend from high school was type 1. So it's like, oh
right.
God, I hate even thinking like that. But the same with the genetically modified organism. And
Well, and I don't.
using unnatural sweeteners in food. And
I agree, and
making the chickens grow too big before
I
they're
agree. Like
slaughtered.
I think that there's lots of things we could go to
No,
lots of
I know
places
that,
for this.
but I'm just saying. Maybe somebody somewhere looked at the population and went, "This is a way to do it covertly."
Okay. Well, I mean,
And the fact that some areas are what they call food deserts.
well, I mean,
All they have is fast food. They don't
well,
have access to all the grocery stores.
well, and truth be told, there's lots of that stuff going on, and
I know.
it's not like
It was
that.
just,
Yeah,
yeah.
dude. Okay, it's not like
I'm
it's
not
like
saying I believe that. I'm just saying,
there's lots of
I'm,
possibilities out there.
yeah.
Okay, but when we're talking about nostalgiaism, when we're talking about the way that people say it was better back then, it's horrible today, and we need to bring in the belief systems that we had back then because they're the ones that will help us. And I think that it's a fallacy because you can't bring a belief system that didn't really work back then.
Well, you can't enact
Uh,
a belief system that subjugates at least half of the population.
well, I mean, I agree, but again, people want what they want, and if they think that they can have it better, because it was better back then. And truthfully, yes, it was more prosperous back then, and they just keep toting that out in front of people. It was more prosperous back then,
Yeah.
but there was reasons it was more prosperous back then, not it was just more prosperous back then. And it really wasn't that great an experience. And there's lots of people out there that didn't enjoy going through it. Um, so it's nostalgiaism is, and what I'm saying about it is that it is a black and white ideology that says either it's black or it's white, and either it's wrong or it's right, either it's good or it's bad. And what they're saying is now is bad, back then was good. We need to bring back then now.
Hence,
And
make America great again.
yeah, well, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so we go, and we can't do that. That's too flat a thinking. We can say there's some really good things that we missed from back then. There's some really good things that we even long to have. That we can say, how can we help create those things now? How can we assist in moving towards something better, or like, I mean, moving towards a more nuclear family? How can we assist that? And like, I mean, we can count that off. We can easier access to healthcare, better paying wages, but again,
Subsidies for single parents.
subsidies for single parents. There's a whole bunch of that stuff, but we have 342 million people that first off have to be okay with being able to do those things, and that's a lot of people to convince.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to be convinced, and there's lots of people out there with a lot of money that don't want other people to be convinced, and so we end up having this war. And not only that, I think that nostalgism works both ways, works on both sides of the fence. You know, we can say those people are nostalgic for that, but these people on the other side could be nostalgic for the 80s instead of the 50s, right? Where the world was way more prosperous, and in corporate America was huge, and
Everyone was starting to get computers.
whatever. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and I think that when we look at nostalgia, and we talk about being able to fondly look back at things, or even to be able to yearn and long for a place back then, but are grounded in reality and understand that we live in today. And in order to be able to recreate, and it's not something that you can recreate, and I think that we should take that out of the lexicon of what we're talking about, because I don't think that recreating is what we want to do. I think that we want to create a better world, and I think that that's what we're after.
That depends on who you ask.
Okay, but I think that we're after a better world for, like, I know that I'm after a better world for everybody, as opposed to just a few people, the ones
Okay.
that to please me. But again, what's a better world look like? That's subjective, and